Hi everyone, my name is Lorena Cantó, and today we will be decoding Kammermusik No.5. This is a work for viola and chamber orchestra that was written in 1925 by Hindemith. And you might be wondering, why are we going to work on this piece? Well, as you may know, the philosophy of our blog is that we divulge the existence of the viola, and that includes every aspect of it. So we decided to start with a composer that has written so much for viola, and in order to treat every piece he wrote equally, we put them in a bag, and this one is the one that came out. At first, I was a little bit weary and I thought, I don't know, I don't really know this piece and I might never play it. But actually, this doesn't make it a bad work. Actually, it's incredibly crucial because it determined the existence of another work that violists play very often. It's a little bit strange to think that maybe other works wouldn't have happened if this piece hadn't existed. So what we'll do today is a kind of analysis that isn't like the technical analysis that you might do if you might play this piece one day, in which you look very deep into the harmony and into the phrasing, and all of these aspects that you need in order to interpret properly a piece and make decisions. But instead, today we're going to do a type of analysis that involves turning the process round and starting with the things we already know with our experience of music. First of all, I would like to play for you the first 6 seconds of this work. Today we will mainly concentrate on the first movement, and I would like you to try to guess what work was inspired by Kammermusik No.5. I don't know how many picked guesses, but I definitely heard Walton the first time I heard this, and I quickly ran to the internet to find out if Walton had been written after this, and indeed 4 years later, Walton premieres or actually finishes composing his concerto for viola, which is the one that we all know and cherish so much. So what we could do now is to try to understand what is it from Hindemith's Kammermusik No.5 that was later taken by Walton for his concerto, or the opposite. What is it from Walton, which we all know so well, that we actually hear in Hindemith? And will that help us to interpret each either of these pieces? This is amazing about this piece, because an important message we can learn is that not every piece we learn is necessarily new, because composers have been inspired by others, and in a way it's all a little bit of mix of inspiration from many different people. And so let's jump into the analysis. The first thing that you might be able to notice is the three-note motif that is used both by Hindemith in just the beginning of the solo part, and in Walton also the opening of the solo part. But then you might be thinking, there's so many differences. Like, I mean, there's three notes rhythmically that could be interpreted the same, but the notes are different, the dynamic is different, and the interpretation is different. As we see in Hindemith, the articulation of this motif has clearly an accent in the first note, and this is something that will carry on being played the same throughout the movement. On the other hand, in Walton's motif, we see that there's clearly a line, and if it was a direct translation from Hindemith to Walton, then we would have had two semiquavers and a quaver. but instead we have a crotchet and with a line on top, meaning that this crotchet needs to be played till the end of it. So in a way, we've got two opposites there. The other thing that we can tell from Walton's three-note motif that keeps developing is that there's flexibility of interpretation throughout the movement. And in some places, we will see accents placed in different places of the motif, depending to where they find themselves in the bar. Now we're looking very, very zoomed in. So what about if we take a little bit of a step back and we look a little bit further? The next thing we might be able to spot is the meter. The fact that in one we've got an alla breve and in the other one we have a 2/4. So what is the relation here? As we know, alla breve is, in other words, a 2/2. And the 2/4 could be, depending on the tempo they are played in, could be played the same. So then we look at the tempo marking that actually Hindemith wrote for this movement, and he wrote minim until 112, which means that there's a lot of flexibility, but he doesn't want it faster than that. Then we look at Walton, and as we see in the writing, the figuration of the notes, he's divided in half the figuration. Instead of having the quavers that we see in Hindemith, we see semiquavers. So in a way, maybe we could say that the tempo that's written for Hindemith could be applied to Walton. I think this is up for you to try, but it's definitely something very interesting, and I will speak a little bit more about this later. Notice that Walton wrote in the name of his movement is più vivo, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean its speed as such, but the energy of it. The next thing we could see, looking at both beginning of movements, is the upbeat motif, which I will call it from now because it will be something recurring. But the upbeat motif is an upbeat that falls onto a downbeat, and it's something that is repeated. And funnily enough, we get the same thing happening in Walton. We get this idea of this upbeat motif playing a part, a secondary part to the three-note motif. How can we tell this movement is linked just by looking at rhythms? Well, just to put an example, if you were played Happy Birthday with just the rhythm of it, would you be able to tell it's that song? Most probably you would, because we humans are able to make connections among the most difficult things, and actually rhythm is one of the bases of a melody. And it's a really fun game for you to try, all this guessing the melody with just having the rhythm. Sometimes it's very difficult. But this is something these composers play a lot with, because as we know, Hindemith was a very important theologian, and he wrote books on theory, and he had his own composition system, which was trying to get away from the Western classical composition style based on the 7-tone scales and triad chords. So in a way, he's trying to put a different hierarchy to the scale, which is now more chromatic. It's based on intervals and also on the harmonic series. Another thing that makes this this beginning of Kammermusik No.5 very compelling is the ostinato, which is the repeated crotchet notes that happen from the start, and it's a pedal that keeps this movement very grounded. And this is something that at first sight you think doesn't appear in Walton, but actually if we go to figure 21, we might be able to see there's a repeated ostinato, this time in quavers, that feels very similar. Perhaps this was influenced by Stravinsky, but we'll look more into this later. I mean, if you've heard the Rite of Spring, you might be able to recognize this kind of idea of having a pedal of crotchets or quavers, or like a rhythmic ostinato. But there's still a lot of difference, right? We see that the ostinato that we find in Walton is very soft, so the effect is actually very different. But even then, it's quite interesting to see. And so after having spoken so much of rhythm, there is a little secret in the middle of his notes that outline part of the melody of Hindemith. And so now I will play for you these two chunks from the two different movements so you can compare them. Despite being seen as being a modern composer, Walton, I feel he still is very much attached to the Western traditional system of composing, in which he uses triads, consonant triads with perhaps odd notes in them, but still very much centered in different keys. Even then, why do we hear such melodies in Walton's music is because he is implementing some of the things that Hindemith is doing with his system into his music.